Good afternoon from the Miami Alumni Association. I'm Molly Young, and today, as part of the Alumni Association's webinar series, we present Lesser Known Lore and Legend, Old School Miami Mysteries. Joining us for some storytelling today are Donna Boen, editor of the Miamian Alumni Magazine, and our friend Steve Gordon, administrator of the McGuffey House and Museum. Welcome to the two of you official historians. We are so happy to have you here. We know that you are a wealth of all things Miami knowledge, so we're excited to have you share some stuff we may not know about the legend and lore here on campus. So thank you. Welcome to you both. Just a reminder to our viewers, you can submit a question throughout the webinar by clicking the Ask a Question button under your video. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Donna and Steve to get us started with this obscure or more obscure campus lore and legend that you may not already know. So welcome to the two of you. We are excited to hear some stories today.
Thanks, Molly. So, Steve, I'm going to go first.
Yes.
Before I get started, I want to make sure to credit the Bicentennial Perspectives book, edited by Kurt Ellison. And I also want to make it clear that if I get anything wrong, that's not from the book, that's me. So the other thing is I'm in an office that usually has 6 people, but everybody else is working from home today. So sometimes the lights go out. So if you see me waving wildly, I'm trying to keep myself from going into the dark. So I also want to mention that the photos I'm using are from the Frank Snyder collection, which are from archives, Miami University Library archives. So with that, I'm going to start with my first mystery. And it is truly a mystery. It's still a mystery that on September 14th, the second day of classes in 1898, a very popular professor of chemistry and physics, Henry Snyder, was found in his laboratory in Brice Hall, and he was dead, with a beaker next to him. And his friends, family, students were all shocked. He had come to classes, first day of class, September 13th, 1898. He had seemed okay, a little out of sorts. He was a very popular professor. They got to know him very well. He actually lived on campus with his wife, Minnie. But he just seemed a little out of sorts. But he also had been sick that summer. So, but he came to class. He didn't miss. Very next day, he's dead, an empty beaker next to him. They had no idea what had happened. The Miami Student at the time, a month later, said that his sorrowful wife was left to mourn his departure. Maybe, maybe not. Let me show you a photo of Professor Snyder. Let me see. Oh, here we go. He is in the top left corner, Professor Snyder. This is the only photo that I know that we have. He's wearing the hat. I have no photos of Minnie, which is interesting because one of the things that they did a lot was perform, because Minnie was very flamboyant as opposed to Professor Snyder, who was quiet and shy. So to appease his wife or whatnot, entertain her, they would do programs, both on campus, around town, Oxford College, where he would give a lecture on physics and he might do some experiments, and then she would perform. She was very flamboyant in her clothing as well, and she played the piano, she sang soprano, she put together a quartet. So she just loved to perform. Professor Snyder was actually from Springfield, Ohio, and he was asked to come to Miami in 1885. We had been closed for several years at that point, and we had just reopened, and he was asked to head the chemistry and physics department. Actually, it looks like he might have been the entire department. I know he had only one room, and it would have been an old main. He then in 1892, they built Brice. Let me see here. I have a photo of Brice, a couple. Some of you, the one on the left is the original building. The one on the right might be more familiar to you. That was a building that was on the northeast corner of where we have King Hall now, very close to Slant Walk. Toby's Fountain is in the front, and I know Steve is going to talk about that a little bit later. For some of the older alums, I know they often met at Toby's Fountain to go uptown. So this gives you some orientation on where Brice was. So it was built in 1892, as I said, as the new science building. And actually, his Professor Snyder's students wired the building. That was their class assignment, a laboratory work as assignment, which I think is amazing. Very impressive, especially at that time when electricity, I believe that might have been the first building on campus that had full electricity. Not sure about that, but I do know his students wired the building. Now, Henry, as I said, he and his wife, Minnie, lived in what we call Stoddard now. It would have been South Hall then. And I wanted to show you what South Hall looked back when they lived in it. This is South Hall. A little bit different than what we're used to. And look at the campus. You really don't see anything except South Hall, although North Hall would be just coincidentally north of South Hall. And that would also be Elliott today. And I had read where they were a little bit nervous about the men, and of course it would have been all men in the hall, and their hijinks that they might have done with them to have fun with them. Let me see. As I said, they like to do a lot of programs. And here's one program that we found where she's listed at least 3 times. She's playing the piano a couple times. She's accompanying people. She's singing. She would just love to be the center of attention. And I had read that Henry became a little bit peevish about sharing the stage because she took more and more of the attention. And I think he got a little tired of that. And when he showed up on that 13th year, again, I think that's kind of cool. It was the 13th day of September, first day of classes on his 13th year at Miami. And the campus also was a little bit different back then. I wanted to show you what Slant Walk would look like when he, Henry, and Minnie were walking campus. Slant Walk. Fideout Gates would have been where you see the little poles there. And this is the campus. Brice Hall's on the far right. Old Main, which would also be Harrison Hall now, because Old Main was torn down in the 1950s. And then you would see a gymnasium on the far left, Heron Hall. And between that and Old Main, behind would be Elliott. You can't see Stoddard from here. But this would be the campus that they would know. So he went to class. Next morning, they find his body. They really were shocked. Question was, what happened? And the consensus at the time was that he committed suicide. Some thought he drank what was in the beaker. Some thought it might have been potassium cyanide or perhaps a brew of poisons. We did an article in Miamian many, many years ago. And at the time, the archivist at the time, Bob Schmidt, said they were unable to actually analyze the concoction he mixed up, except that apparently there was enough to kill an army in it. The conclusion that he committed suicide became suspect when Minnie married William Pugh. Now, William was her guitarist in her orchestra. He was also the professor's lab assistant. Ooh, that's a little suspect, isn't it? They moved to Columbus, and nothing else. As far as I know, that was it. Nobody figured out what happened to the professor. Don't know what happened to William. We do know that many years later, Minnie wrote a letter to President Upham, Miami's president at the time, and she blamed her husband's death on too much work, that his life was all about work at Miami, and that he just forgot his wife, his health, and his pleasure. So that would be the mystery of Professor Henry Snyder in Brice Hall. Molly, back to you.
Well, hello there. Thank you, Donna. So we're going to bring Steve back, and we're going to let him dive in to some other mysteries that have cooked up around campus. So I'm going to throw your slides up there, Steve. And please take it away.
Thank you, Molly. I want to thank the charming Molly Young and the alumni staff for hosting these webinars. It's a great opportunity for alumni and staff to just connect and learn a lot more about various topics on the campus and off the campus. And also thank Donna Boen for her nearly 40 years as an exemplary writer, editor, and a truly delightful colleague for all Miamians and alumni. So thank you, Donna. And as Donna eloquently said, a thank you to Miami's Special Collections staff, the archives with Jackie Johnson, and of course to Curtis Ellison for his wonderful work in editing the bicentennial perspectives. So it's a great place to work because none of us do it alone. You've heard the cliche about it takes a village. Well, in this case, it takes a university for all of us to do well at our various positions. So a little bit about our next mystery and lore. I often suggest to people when you're studying history, try to mentally put yourself back into the time that you are studying or discussing. Exactly 199 years ago tomorrow, Miami began courses of instruction here in Oxford. Only a few weeks earlier in October, Robert Hamilton Bishop and his family arrived in Oxford. The selection of Bishop as Miami's first president may arguably rank among the best recruiting efforts ever by the university. He was university trained at Edinburgh, a noted scholar. Bishop and his new bride, Anna, in 1803, traveled 4,000 miles from Scotland to the Ohio country, eventually settling in Lexington, Kentucky, where he would teach for 20 years at Transylvania College. Now, Stephen Millett, one of three sons born to Catherine and John D. Millett, has noted that Bishop's presidency brought tenets of the Scottish Enlightenment to the American frontier and the university. And rather than being called the Yale of the West, Millett suggests a more accurate nickname might be Edinburgh on the frontier. In 1830, the US population census lists Bishop and his wife, Anna, 8 children, and a female household servant living in Oxford. The image you see on your right, drawn in 1838, of course, shows the iconic slant walk, probably one of the oldest physical features still surviving on the Oxford campus. Old Main and Eliot and Stoddard, Old Egypt on your far right, and of course the house that you see where approximately King Library is today was the Bishop House, until the lovely house on the left was first built actually by his son and enlarged by Robert Hamilton Bishop, where he would live for several years. Now, Bishop, I believe, still holds the distinction of the longest tenure of any Miami president, began in November of 1824, and in 1841, he was forced to resign, but he remained on faculty as chair of history and political science, notably with a substantial reduction in pay, where he stayed until 1845, when the Miami Board purged both Bishop and John Witherspoon Scott and ushered in the rigidly conservative presidency of Erasmus McMaster. This decision may go down as among the more dubious board choices in the history of the university. Scott recruited Bishop to accept a position at Farmers College in Cincinnati, where he served as president from 1845 to 1855. There, well, before I get a little further, I want to just show a couple of images here. This is the beautiful hallway of the Bishop House, which stood at the corner of High and Bishop Street until 1960. Beautiful federal fan light. You look at the piece of furniture on your left with the plaster bust of Dr. Bishop, and that is the federal sideboard that was brought to Oxford from Lexington, Kentucky by President Bishop and his family. and it is currently an exhibit at the McGuffey House and Museum. A remarkable artifact and survived from the earliest days of Miami University. Now, getting back to the Farmers College, it was at Farmers College from 1848 to 1850. One of Bishop's students was a young man named Benjamin Harrison, and another one was Samuel Hannaford, an English-born immigrant who would achieve renown as Cincinnati's foremost architect of the late 19th century, designing over 300 buildings, including Music Hall and City Hall. Robert and Anna Bishop died 2 weeks apart in the spring of 1855. Rather than be buried among leading contemporaries in Cincinnati Spring Grove Cemetery, the Bishops were, as was the Scottish tradition, buried in an unmarked mound on the grounds of the Farmers College. In 1959, plans for the new Aiken High School and Belmont Avenue in College Hill necessitated removal of the Bishop burials. President John D. Millett and Miami staff took a dump truck down to Belmont Avenue, and there they exhumed the remains of the Bishops. They were found in zinc-lined coffins, which actually were in remarkably good condition. The story has been told that when the coffins were brought back to the service building, which is now Cole Service Center, it was an earlier building on that site, that there was a young man working that summer on grounds. And President Millett said to the young man, "Would you like to see the remains of President Bishop and his wife?" And the young man said to President Millett, "Do not get in my way between those coffins and the door, because I am not going to view those remains." And that young man was Wayne Embry. So there was a site selected in, of course, the formal gardens, and per the wishes of the Bishops, as they had been interred on the grounds of the Farmers College, they were placed in an unmarked location in a shallow mound. Oh, let me back up here again, the image here. You'll see John D. Millett and Professor Walter Havikhurst, whose home was within a stone's throw of the site here in the formal gardens. And on the right, you will see a boy. That's Steve Millett, one of three sons to John and Catherine Millett, who told me that he very much regretted not actually being able to join his father and staff when they went down to College Hill to exhume the remains of the Bishops, but he was there for the reinterment at the formal gardens. A little comment here about President Millett. Almost every photograph you will see of Dr. Millett, he is impeccably dressed. And my sister, who was a 1961 graduate, always said she thought President Millett was the handsomest and best dressed man she had ever seen. And of course, there's Walter Havikhurst. There was a wonderful program at King Library just this week on Havikhurst and many contributions he made as a Midwestern writer and to literature. And I believe this person back here, I believe that is Foster Cole, who is the head of physical facilities at the time. And this gentleman over here would be Cal Conrad's father. And Cal Conrad currently lives here in Oxford, as many of you know. So the Circle of Remembrance was begun in 1989, and many Miamians, faculty, staff, and friends, when they would travel to Scotland, would bring back various stones and pieces of flint, and they would be placed in the Circle of Remembrance here. From 1824 to 1955, 4 generations and 6 members of the Bishop family served the university. Robert Hamilton Bishop IV was a trustee of the university from 1918 to 1955. What you're looking at here would be what are known as the Bishop Gates. I had thought for years they were named exclusively for Robert Hamilton. In fact, they're named for the entire family, and in particular, the widow of Robert Hamilton Bishop IV wished to have the gates erected in memory of her father and the Bishop family to mark the sesquicentennial of the university. So the summer of 1960 was indeed a busy one. We were celebrating the dedication of the reburial of the bishops in the formal gardens, and also the dedication of the memorial gates along Patterson Avenue. Thank you. Back to you, Molly.
Hey, excellent. Thank you so much. I think some of that has been familiar to us, but hearing that whole story unfold, I think lends a little more information to that. Donna, are you up on the docket next?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Well, here we go, Steve. You and I are we're gonna head out, and we're gonna bring Donna back.
Good.
All right.
There you go. Nope.
There we go.
All righty. All right. Thanks, Steve. I always enjoy hearing what you have to say, and I always learn something. So this next story is not so much mystery, or maybe it's a mystery how this lore started and why it continues. But I want to show a picture of Ogden. This would be soon after it was built. And in case you don't remember, or you haven't been on campus, on the Oxford campus, Ogden Hall, if you're uptown and you're heading down High Street, it's the very first building you see on your right. And it's named after George C. Ogden, who was Miami class of 1863, and he was a Cincinnati physician and poet. And his sister, Laura Ogden Whaling, contributed the largest bequest Miami had received at that point to build Ogden Hall. And she had one request, which that it would be west of Heron Gym. The problem was Heron Gym is where Ogden Hall is now. And they didn't want to use the open green space, which is still open green space, except on alumni weekends when we put up red and white tents and eat together and have a good old time. But the tents don't stay there all year. So it was a green space across from Lewis Place, the president's house. And they didn't want to put Ogden there. Plus, if they had, Ogden is such a big building, it would have crossed over Slant Walk. So they would have needed to have taken down Heron Gym or moved it. Now that part is true. The lore, which I heard as a student, and I've heard many times since, and I don't know, I've never seen it written down, but I certainly have heard the conversation many times, is that another stipulation of Mrs. Whaling was that they build a 10-foot wall around Ogden to protect the women residents. Miami didn't want a 10-foot wall around it. Now, again, this is still the lore. So Miami built the 10-foot wall and put it all underground. Now, the fact is, the residence hall was for men, not women, and Miami never built the wall. So what we were trying to figure out, or not necessarily we, but let me move on here. This was the original thought of Ogden Hall. Of course, as you see, it didn't come out that way, but I thought it would be fun to look at how they first conceived it. We also, by the way, we're going to get a much bigger bequest, but it went to court because the family didn't want Miami to get that money. So by the time it came to us, we got maybe about half of what they said we would be getting. Still paid for Ogden Hall and for some scholarships. Let me see here. The next slide is, this is Heron Gym. And it's on the site right now in this photo of where Ogden Hall is. As you can see, it's a rather substantial building. Here's an overview I just am putting there because I thought it was cool to see what the campus looked like back then, and also to see how big that building is. So they decided to move it. They weren't going to tear it down. But first they had to clear the trees on the east side of the building. And that would be what you would see today as the front lawn of Rowdybush. which, by the way, doesn't have very many trees. So they clear all the trees, and they decided they were going to move it they had to move it very slowly. I have a photo here. You can see where they put it on poles. By the way, I don't think I mentioned that Professor Snyder's students wired the electricity on Heron Gym. And some of you might remember Heron Gym as Van Voris Gym. It was actually on campus until 1983, when it was torn down, and the parking lot for Brice Hall is where it was. And there's a rock near the parking lot that tells you about Van Voris. Well, that was Van Voris Heron Gym originally. So here. So when they went to build, finally, they went to build Ogden Hall. They had moved Heron the year before. They held a parade to lay the cornerstone. And I wanted to show you this next photo because this may be where some of that lore is coming in about the 10-foot wall. When you look at this, you can see, again, how deep the foundation's going. And it could be, the speculation is that you could see the foundation of Heron Gym. And so maybe, who knows where lore comes from. Would love to know how this got started. I would love to know how the Miami merger and Upham Hall Arch got started. If anybody ever finds any facts to share that one with us, please do. Anyway, back to the wall. They think maybe it was the foundation of Heron Hall. Somebody saw it. Somebody started telling a good story about this 10-foot wall buried underneath Ogden. Again, not true, but why let the facts get in the way of a good story, right? Let me see here. I think I wanted to end with another photo of Ogden Hall quite a time ago. Also wanted to mention that Ogden Hall has been going through major renovation, and so it has been closed for a while. And next fall, it will be open again for students. So that is the story of the wall, or no wall, and why it may have been perpetuated. Thanks, Molly.
Great. Here we are back in action again. Steve, I'm going to bring you back. We're going to throw your slides back up and let you take the helm.
All right.
All right.
Well, first of all, thank you, Donna. I also learned a great deal from you and wonderful visuals. I did not know about the electrification of the students. And you're exactly right. The 1890s was about the time period, I believe, when the electric light plant started in Oxford. So now this is a joy to present. Many of you have heard or know something about this wonderful, eccentric, colorful, the adjectives just continue on, for a man named Harry Sylvester Toby, the original HST, even more original than Harry S. Truman. Campus character for 5 decades. There's been nobody else like Harry S. Toby. Probably his most well-known quote was he would take the sideline of Old Miami Field, of course, which was at Patterson and High, and he would have a big megaphone. That was his trademark. And he would say in the megaphone, "I had a dream last night." And he would proceed to predict the exploits of the Miami football team, mesmerizing the fans in Miami Field. Okay, let's see on the slides here. Of course, there's that slide later in life on your right, Old Miami Field. It's from the 40s. This one here on the left most likely is Old Crosley Field in Cincinnati, which started as Redland Field. Let's see, sorry. So, really interesting man. He got a large family. Here he is pictured in 1940 with his son, Ralph, holding some of his grandchildren. And there on the right, you see you can really get a feel for the colorful Harry S. Toby. The photo showing him, notice his Miami pennants, his trademark small parasol. He generally always wore a white suit with red accents, which would fit perfectly for the Miami colors and the Cincinnati Reds colors. So he would walk down in a football game, walk down the sidelines with an umbrella, acting as if he was on a tightrope, kind of balancing from right to left. By all accounts, Toby had a very, very light feet and was able to just be, he was a wonderful dancer, charmed everybody wherever he went. And he must have been in peak physical condition because at one point during his career, he actually was building the smokestack for the Champion power plant in Hamilton. And he wanted to set off a series of fireworks from the top, and he was going to walk around the crown of this huge smokestack. Unfortunately, the fireworks went off prematurely, and he was unable to do that. But that's just one of his many exploits that achieved fame for Harry S. Toby. Now, Donna talked about the buildings being built in the 1890s and early 20th century. Toby was a very important builder and stonemason and brick mason here in Oxford. You can see here in this image what today would be called Irvin Drive. You'll see, I believe that is Elliott on the left, and we're looking south. Stoddard would be beyond it. And the construction crew, which you might note, there were several African Americans that built many of the Miami buildings. These were local men that were very good at their trades. And I believe that Toby was right in there somewhere, probably helping them and supervising either the concrete work or the brickwork. You'll see Heron Gym, which Donna mentioned. And on the lower right, originally built as Benton Hall about 1908. Now, of course, Hall Auditorium, but you see the cornerstone for Benton Hall. Cornerstones laid prior to the actual completion of buildings, 1907. Lloyd and Johnson were the primary contractors, but the brick mason was Toby. And one of the distinctions of his brickwork was called silver dollar mortar joints. They were very thin and precise. Something that he was noted for here in Oxford were his wonderful mortar joints and brickwork. Now, Toby had a very interesting house that still stands on Chestnut Street at South College Avenue. It was originally built, obviously, by Toby, and it was called Sunset Place. And many family gatherings there over the years. Unfortunately, there was a severe fire in 1930. He had rented portion of the second floor to Sigma Nu Fraternity, and apparently a fire started there, and that wonderful roof was completely destroyed, and it was rebuilt. But in 1940, you see the population census. Again, thank you to Miami University Libraries. We have access to the U.S. Census online. You'll see that Harry Toby is listed as the head of household, 70 years old, from Indiana. His wife, Hyla, who attended Western College for a while, and his son-in-law and their family. And I often thought it just rather amusing that when he would introduce himself, he and his wife to friends, he would say, "She's Hyla and I'm Harry." It's easy to remember that couple's name. Now, getting back to the, well, here's some of the interior fireplaces of his home here in Oxford. Sunset Place, which still stands, is currently the Talawanda Board of Education offices, but you can see the caliber and quality of his detailing. The wonderful mosaic tiles, the glazed tiles on your left, the kind of the interesting eclectic stonework in the middle one, the brick and other tile on some of the other fireplace mantels. This is vintage, what some people have called Toby-esque. Now, there are some people that actually didn't care for some of it. Wallace Roudebush being one of those. The story is that there was a Toby fireplace here in the McGuffey House. And when the Roudebush family purchased the house in the 20s, it was removed and more of a colonial style fireplace was installed. Now, this house still stands on Chestnut Street, immediately west of Sunset Place. Charming small house, another one built by Toby. And again, getting back to his physical fitness, he must have just, I mean, the work involved in not only carrying these stones, but also laying them up with certainly a staff of workers. and I believe several of them would have been African Americans working hand in hand with Harry S. Tobey here in Oxford. This is a story of the people who helped build Oxford, I think is waiting to be told. We know a fair amount about the architects, but I think it would be wonderful to do more research on the actual builders. And probably the most famous, as Donna mentioned earlier, was a grotto-esque fountain that Tobey started building along Slant Walk in the early 20th century. Mind you, in those days, I think that the university, it was much more casual and it was much smaller at that time. And I think Tobey was probably in some ways a character that the students, he was endearing to them. And he was seen as probably rather benign by the university. And they said, if you want to build your fountain, go ahead. And so he started doing this grotto-esque fountain. And it turned into where you actually had not only a fountain, but you also had a small pool with goldfish in it. So you would have these small pools that birds can take a drink. You had a fountain for humans. And then you had a fountain we'll see in a second that was more than just humans. This is a very serene view on your right showing the two university students just casually walking up Slant Walk, and you see Tobey's fountain on its left. This is in its declining years, 1948. So I'm going to go back here again to this and talk a little bit more. So the bottom one, both of these by Frank Snyder. You saw the one earlier that Donna had shown. And these are probably about 1905, 1910. What had happened is by the late 40s and 50s, I believe the two things were happening. Probably the university was thinking that they're starting to see the Georgian revival colonial style is more of a brand for the university. And at this particular type of structure, it's almost like a vernacular form of an arts and crafts done by a local builder, probably did not fit well with the new brand of the university. And secondly, there were concerns about the quality of the water. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that on the last slide. Let's go to this one next. So Tobey, getting back to him, at the Miami football games, through his megaphone, Tobey would declare, "I had a dream last night," followed by his predictions of Miami's exploits on the field. He also warned and cautioned all the opponents of the Redskins that Miami's football team would, quote, mesmerize, pulverize, and liquidize the visiting team. His dancing and smile was what they described as 16 diamond fillings. I can't believe they were diamond, maybe silver or gold. Absolutely captivated the crowd. His dancing at fraternity parties left many Miami co-eds breathless as he belted out a red-hot rumba. From 1906 until the last homecoming game in 1949, Tobey never missed a Miami home or road game, including bowl games. He and Andy Stephanopoulos may rank among the most loyal Miami football fans ever. Tobey claimed to have crashed 20 World Series games, 8 Rose Bowl games, and 4 Orange Bowl games. We have a letter in our Miami archives written in 1931 from Wallace Roudebush to a UC alum who was planning the homecoming game at Nippert Stadium, which we played every year until I believe the 1970s when we finally did a home and away. But in that letter, he says, quote, "I will do all possible to keep Tobey from coming to the game as a clown." So the UC fans and administrators were not amused by Tobey's antics, although I think Miami loved it. So Tobey claimed he got into all the Miami games free. He was pretty much considered an honorary fan. So here you see, this is at the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. And one of the trivia questions I like to ask sports fans and followers of Miami sports is, name the 2 members in the Hall of Fame that are from Butler County, Ohio. And the easy one, of course, is Walter Smokey Alston. But most people stumble trying to figure out the second, including myself when I was first asked this question. And it turns out it's Harry S. Tobey. I believe there are 5 super fans that are currently have a statue or whatever you want to call this in the Hall of Fame. One of them, of course, you'll see Harry Tobey on the left. And another one that's probably the most famous was the indomitable Hilda Chester. And for those of you that may have be old enough to have followed the old Brooklyn Dodgers, Hilda Chester was a really remarkable person. And this is an era when eccentricity, I think, was much more permissible in society at that time. In Ebbets Field, you would have a fan-based band that would travel around the grandstands, and they called themselves the Symphony Band. And Hilda Chester would sit in the outfield. She refused to sit in the box seat. She wanted to sit out with the real fans, and she had a very large cowbell. And she would ring that cowbell, and then in her Brooklynese accent, would throw insults to all the opposing teams. Now, Tobey, he loved Brooklyn because Brooklyn at Ebbets Field, they let him in free. They liked Harry Tobey. But when he tried to go to a World Series at Yankee Stadium, he found himself in the brig. They actually had a brig in Yankee Stadium, and he was put in the brig. They did not like him at all. And for the rest of his life, he hated the Yankees. But he was warm to most of the Brooklyn fans and the Brooklyn team. So Tobey, he died. He had some heart issues. He died in 1950, in the spring of 1950. And you can see him in the upper left there in his later years. And then there he is on the right in his certainly classic pose. This is out in the right field grandstands of Old Crosley Field. And for those of you that are Reds fans, and old enough that during the day it was called the sun deck, and at night it was called the moon deck. And that's Western Avenue, right in the background there, along where the buildings are. And there he is in his typical pose with his megaphone, balancing right there on the wall between the field of play and the bleacher seats. And then in the middle, you will see an article that was in the Miami Student in 1960, talking about Harry Tobey's fountain. And by that time, as I had alluded to earlier, the water quality had severely deteriorated. In fact, the fountain was being largely removed. But upperclassmen would say the only thing good about Tobey's fountain was only freshmen and dogs would take a drink out of Tobey's fountain. And there's Floyd, who was probably one of the best known canines on Miami's campus, the Sigma Nu mascot. Floyd, during the late 50s and early 60s, would basically prowl around campus and was, when I was in school, there was a wonderful dog that we all knew. He was called 4 Point. He was a St. Bernard, much like Floyd. So I thought it would just touch on Harry S. Tobey. Again, the era when we had these wonderful fans and eccentrics that added a lot of color and interest to our campus community and the town of Oxford. And it's just a joy to do research on people like this. It's one of the pleasures of working in a university community because we have the whole spectrum of personalities here. And so with that, I want to conclude, and I want to also say to Molly and the alumni staff, it is always a pleasure engaging with Miami alumni. I learned so much from them. They're very important to this university. I want to thank them for their support and all the people that gave to the Move in Miami in August. So love having visitors come to the campus. Of course, the students are the lifeblood. I think that's what keeps us all young here on this campus. Is always exciting in August when the students come back. So I just want to, again, thank Molly and the alumni staff. You do a terrific job, as does Donna.
Oh, thank you so much, Steve. And I have to say, I would be remiss if I didn't. I have to say that these feelings are reciprocated far and wide across campus about the two of you who are such wonderful stewards of our history and of the lore and the legend and all of the things in between for so many years. You two are such gifts to this university, and thank you for continuing to share these stories that might not otherwise get shared with any regularity or with any factual sort of underscore. So we do appreciate the fact that you two can keep passing this along. I've had several, not questions, but comments from the viewing audience.
Molly, I'm going to interrupt you just a second.
Yes, please.
Forgive me. Steve, I wanted to add a PS to your Toby story. Again, lore and mystery, but it's one that's been out there a lot. Forgive me for not giving a fact here. But when the fountain was removed and they made it it's a circular bench and a sorority monument, I heard when I was taking the first tour of campus, probably 1978, that if you stood, now I was told if you stand on top of it, of the monument, other people say if you stand to the west of it and you yell for Toby, you face the library, King Library, and you yell his name 3 times, he will yell back to you because that is where his spirit lives. Again, it's not a fact, obviously, but wrapping up the mystery thing today, I just thought I'd add that story that I know a lot of people know.
Well, I wonder how many people are going to go try that. If you're on campus and you try that and you get some feedback, I am curious to know. I would love to hear that. Well, I wanted to tell you that rather than lots of questions, I've gotten lots of just comments about how wonderful the two of you are and how wonderful it is that you two work so hard to preserve Miami's rich history in so many ways. So I just wanted to make sure I said that because
I didn't even know my mom was tuning in.
I suppose you have more fans than just your mom. That is for sure. We do have a couple questions. So Cecilia asks, are the bishops actually buried at the Circle of Remembrance, or are they sort of actually unmarked as they preferred?
Well, I neglected to touch on that, and thank you. Is it Cecilia or Celia?
Cecilia.
Cecilia, yes, a very good question and absolutely important. They are not buried in the Circle of Remembrance. I think the decision was made in 1959 to place them in a spot which most people would not know, to prevent any kind of hijinks or pranks from any kind of students thinking about exhuming them. So, and it's such an isolated spot back there that there was fear that could happen or something mischievous might happen. So they are buried in a small rise near the Circle of Remembrance. Oh, and I also forgot to mention the caskets that you saw in the photographs were milled from a very large oak tree that was being cut down for the construction of Color Hall. Oh. And the tree was believed to have been on campus when President Bishop was here from 1824 to 1841. So that was a very, very nice touch, I thought.
Indeed, absolutely. I kind of like that story. Let's see. So let's go back to the picture of Harry with his son and his grandchildren. You showed the mosaics, the patterns, which, by the way, thank you for sharing those, because I love those two buildings. They're just up the street and I pass them every day. And I've always been curious what goes on the inside of those, what they look like, and if the craftsmanship is every bit as beautiful on the inside. So thank you for sharing those. But she wants to know, is that in his home on Chestnut Street? Were those from? Yes.
No, that was Sunset Place inside.
Okay. All right. Yeah. That was a question from Allison.
I want to just say that the Board of Education has done a good job in maintaining the integrity of the mosaic tiles and the tile work in the house and portions of the porch. I couldn't begin to show the richness of all the detailing in the exterior, because Toby would find just scrap artifacts, old bases of bottles and broken glass and pieces of granite and just odd things that he would put in as he's doing the construction of these buildings. And that's hence the term Toby-esque detail. It's hard to describe.
Well, they're such beautiful buildings, and I think what lends itself to its beauty is that they're so unique and so not like any other building here in town. So treasures, those two are. I'm super excited and was super excited to see that you put those in. Donna, related to the Ogden Hall, your photo, Clark mentions that there were a lot of Masons in that photo, and he suggests you might check with the Masonic Lodge to see what they know about it. He says typically that when Masons lay the cornerstones, they will also bury other items in the ground. So perhaps there's some potential for a little treasure.
Yeah, thank you very much.
There. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Just a quick tip. And then Richard says he started class here in the fall of 1983. So that was the same year as the demolition of the gym. He said he was able to save a brick and still has it to this day. So lots of people out there with little actual bits and pieces of Miami history, like that's real pieces. Let's see. Cindy says, thank you for this. It's been very interesting. She says she thinks she's going to reread her old Havinghurst Miami books soon. So you've inspired some folks to crack a book they haven't maybe opened in a while. I really love that. Katie asks if you know anything about Miami being ever part of the Underground Railroad network. I don't know any stories about this personally, but do either of you have any stories, or is there any relationship to Oxford and that network?
You want me to try and answer that, Donna?
Yes, please.
I think the authority on the Underground Railroad would be Valerie Elliott, who for 30 years was a manager of our Smith Library. And this question has been posed to Valerie many, many times. And she and the local chapter of the NAACP have done a lot of research. And there are very few that are documented. I'm not even sure if there's any on campus. There's been some discussion, possibly Lewis Place, but an African-American gentleman by the name of Jones, who I believe he had a farm on Kerr Road, is a documented one. But to my knowledge, there are none that we're aware of directly here in Oxford that can be really well documented. So I'm hoping I'm answering that correctly. It's been mentioned that a lot of the houses, people think they're hidey holes in these houses, and they were often used for the Underground Railroad when there, in many cases, were more utilitarian reasons for it. It may be storing certain types of preserved items. It could be part of a heating system in the basement, or for getting fresh air into the house. So you have to be very cautious. And when you see a strange room or a strange place, could have been a fruit cellar or something, you don't,
I actually know of a couple old houses here in town that have spaces like that are somewhat ambiguous, but you could one could assume that that's what it was used for. But
the other thing I would just inject to the campus is we had a lot of Southern students here at Miami prior to the Civil War, a large number. And it doesn't seem very plausible to me that someone who is trying to escape from the slave states would come through Oxford, where the houses are fairly visible on a pretty important turnpike road, being today's US 27. I'm thinking of Lewis Place or someplace like that. It just would be too exposed, I think, and there's a risk that a Southerner might see somebody who's African American and might, quote unquote, look suspicious. I would say they follow the streams out in the country more, because they knew the rivers went pretty much north-south in this area. Most of the streams pretty much go north-south, 4 Mile Creek, 7 Mile, etc. To get them further north, places like Fairhaven were much more likely to be in the Underground Railroad than I think Oxford was. But that's just my unverified observation about the Underground Railroad.
That could potentially be its own webinar.
Yeah.
On its own. I think there's enough history that we could maybe delve a little deeper into that. I know everybody always wants to know about Fisher Hall and Helen Peabody. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to cover that today because those could potentially be their own standalone webinars.
Yes.
So we very much appreciate you all tuning in for these sort of lesser known pieces of lore and legend. These were really exciting little tidbits to pick up. I really didn't know a lot of these stories, and I am homegrown from Oxford my whole life. I went to college here, I continue to work here, and even some of these things you shared were unfamiliar to me. So this has been an absolute pleasure listening to the two of you. I hope we can put something together again. Maybe we can return to lesser known Miami history part 2. We'll have to formulate that and what that looks like. But I am so glad to have had you here to share some of these stories. And on Halloween of all days, it seemed completely appropriate. So thank you very much to you two, Steve and Donna. You are Miami treasures, and we are so fortunate to have you here with us. So thank you again for sharing these stories. As a reminder, our viewing audience can get a recorded version of this webinar on our website later today. Of course, you can see this one and all of our other webinar presentations at alumlc.org/MiamiOH. Thank you all again for joining us. Love and honor, and of course, happy Halloween. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.